Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad to have you with us this morning for our very last Inside the Fossil Lab of this year. To view live closed captions for this program in English and Spanish, please click on the link we're going to drop in the chat now. So my name is Agnes and I work with the education team at the Brea Tar Pits. Today we will have the opportunity to chat with one of our fossil preparators, Connie, and our lab manager, Steph, who will both be joining us from inside the garden today at our museum. Our fossil lab is actually undergoing maintenance at this moment. So I'm joined off screen by my colleagues, Cassie, Rachel, and Jules, who will be helping to organize your questions. Thanks so much, team. Before we get started, I want to share a little bit about what you're going to do with us today. We're going to be together for about the next 30 minutes, and we're going to learn all about teeth. After Steph and Connie are done sharing, we're going to take some time and answer your questions. This might be a different format of Zoom than some of our students joining today are used to. You won't see any of your classmates, your teacher, or any of the other people watching this program today. And we cannot see or hear you. You'll only be able to see and hear us. So since we can't actually see one another, I do want to take a moment to make a shout out to students joining us from all of today's schools. Welcome, everyone. Since we can't see any of you and you can only see us right now, we're going to use the chat function to ask questions. During the presentation, you can click on the chat box, type in your question, and we will try and answer as many as possible during our Q&A session at the end. Your question will only be seen by the museum staff who are running the Zoom right now. The chat box is currently closed, but we will open it up during our presentation. And we do ask that all of our friends joining us today only put questions or comments related to the presentation in the chat. This helps us make sure we can get through as many questions as possible. To respect our panelists and our staff assisting with this program, we also ask that we use appropriate language in the chat. Folks not following a code of conduct may be asked to leave today's program. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and some may even be answered during the presentation. But if we don't get to your question today, I encourage you to write it down so you can learn more about our lab on your own. So if you'd like, go ahead and grab a piece of paper and a pencil, and you can record your experience while you're watching with us today. You can note down any of those questions you have, maybe a few facts you learned, or draw or write a description of what the fossil lab looks like. And as I mentioned, today we're going to hear from fossil preparator Connie Clark and lab manager Steph Potts about the work they do inside the fossil lab. They're going to share their knowledge about teeth with us. So I'm going to switch the camera over to them, and you're going to see me again in a little bit. Hi, Steph and Connie. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about teeth and why they're so important to us. So teeth can tell us not only a lot about the animal, but they're really great for use in identifying what animals we're looking at. So today we'll be talking about teeth and how they help us understand animals in both the past and the present. And so to start, I think we'll move on to our first slide. Thanks, Agnes. And just talk about what teeth are used for. So teeth are used primarily for eating in a lot of animals, breaking down the food to help animals digest it. Teeth can also be used by animals to help get food. So you can see that lizard on the bottom catching that little insect there. So teeth can be very useful, and animals can use them to help actually capture their food. And then teeth also are used in some animals for defense and for fighting. So on the top right, you see some male elephants who are fighting over territory. And so they're using those tusks, which are actually just giant front teeth to help them with that fight. And so teeth can be used in a lot of different ways, which means they have a lot of different shapes, and that can help us with identifying and finding out about what they do. And so what are teeth made of? We move to the next slide. We can get an idea of how teeth have all these different materials that help them do their job. So this is a model of a tooth, and it's a model of a human tooth. And you can see these three main materials that teeth are made of. So the first that's usually covering the outside of the tooth is enamel. And enamel is the toughest substance in the body. It's about 96% mineral, this calcium apatite mineral that's very, very hard and tough. And so it's really great for resisting wear and for being very, very sturdy. And then usually on the inside of the tooth, there's a softer material called dentin. And dentin is only about 50% mineral by volume. So it's a little bit softer and it helps with absorb some of the impacts that the teeth are constantly experiencing as they're sort of colliding with each other to chew. And then over the root of the tooth, the part of the tooth that's in the jawbone, there's another material called cementum. And this is a little bit harder than dentin. It's about 65% mineral, and it just covers the root of the tooth. So not all animals have all materials, these three materials in their teeth, but the teeth are made of at least enamel or dentin. And how the enamel and dentin is arranged and how it's shaped can help us not only identify animals, but help us learn more about them. So animals have not just these materials in their jaw, but they have these materials in all these different shapes. So I think if we can end the slideshow, and I'll do a little show and tell. Yes, perfect. Yes, so this is a dire wolf cast, and throughout the presentation, we'll be using a variety of different bones from teeth and bones from modern animals, from fossils and replicas. So this is a replica, and this is a mammal like us. And so they have all of these different shapes of teeth in the mouth. So right here, you can see the incisors, and these are the front teeth. They're in us as well, those front teeth that you have. And then they also have canines. So this is this sort of sharp, specialized tooth. And then they have these teeth right here called premolars and then molars. And so these are teeth towards the back of the jaw. And all these different teeth have different shapes that help animals do what they do. And this is an important thing to note, that this is only true for mammals. I'm sorry, Agnes, if you could bring up the slides again, we can talk about other animals that also have teeth, but not quite as specialized as mammals. So on the screen, you can see a lizard jaw, and you'll notice that all those little pegs sticking up are the teeth. So reptiles and fish actually don't have this sort of tooth specialization that mammals do. So when we see a jaw with a lot of the same type of tooth in the mouth, we know we're not looking at a mammal. And lizards have these nice little peg-like teeth because they can help catch things like insects and prey. And on top, we've got a penny for scale, just so you can see how small that little lizard jaw fossil is. Snakes have a very similar arrangement. You can go to the next slide. Oh, thank you. So you can still see that same penny for scale, but this is the jaw of a garter snake. And so you can see it's the same type of tooth throughout the jaw, but in the snakes, the tooth is actually curved backwards. And this helps a lot with capturing prey. You can imagine that snake grabbing onto a mouse, and those backward curved teeth really help that snake keep that mouse and prevent that mouse from escaping so it can get its meal. So this is an example of teeth being used to help capture prey. And so from here, we'll move it over to Steph for more show and tell. Thank you.
So now that Connie has showed you the different kinds of teeth that we can find in different animals, we'll be focusing a little bit more on mammals at the moment, and we'll be looking at the different kinds of teeth we find within different kinds of mammals. So the first thing we'll look at is at carnivores. Carnivores are meat-eating animals, and here at the Tar Pits, the most common carnivores that we do find are the dire wolf and the saber-toothed cat. Now, carnivores have a hyper-specialized form of dentition, and one of their very specialized teeth is one of the molars called a carnacion. And so Connie is showing you that carnacion. You can see on that one side, it's got all these different folds, but if we turn it around, on the other side, it has it's a much smoother, flatter surface. And what the carnacions help do in carnivores is to actually break down and cut up the teeth, the meat, very similar to a scissor. You can see how those blades are moving against each other and can help cut up paper. And with the carnacions, those flat surfaces, when they move, like in this diagram, you can see the bottom carnacion and then the top, how they move against each other, just like a pair of scissors to cut up the meat. But in carnivores, teeth are not always used only for eating the meat. but carnivores have to hunt and capture their prey items. And the saber-toothed cat that we have over here has these very long canines. And these were not used to eat at all, but were actually used to capture and catch their prey items. Next up, we're going to look at other kinds of mammals, insectivores, and I'm going to ask Agnes if you can please bring that slide up. So insectivores are animals that eat insects, and insects have an exoskeleton, which means they have this harder outer casing that makes up their body. And insectivores are animals that eat these insects, and you'll notice on the screen they have these sharp, pointy teeth. And the reason for that is it helps them crack open and break open that outer casing, that exoskeleton, so they can get to all the good nutrients that they need inside the insect. So right at the top, the all-white teeth belongs to bats, and at the bottom is the lower jaw of a shrew. Now you'll see their teeth are very similar in makeup, and so when we find these teeth here at the tar pits and we look at them under the microscope, sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between bats and shrews. But a nice thing is that shrews have a little clue on their teeth that helps us to be able to identify them. So like I said, the shrew lower jaw is at the bottom, and you'll notice the tips of the teeth have this red staining. And these are actually concentrated iron deposits at the tip of the teeth. And what those iron deposits do is they help to give strength and rigidity to these teeth so that the tips don't break off or wear down too quickly. And when we look for these fossils in the fossil record, or when we find them here under the microscope, we can actually still see those red iron stains on the shrew teeth. And that can also help us to distinguish between shrews and bats. Okay, and then next up, we're going to talk about tooth replacement. So we have Proboscidean fossils here as well, and this is a term we use to group mammoths and mastodons. It's also where we find elephants, African and Asian elephants, and so these are all the elephants that we find. And we have about 32 Colombian mammoths here in our collection, and they have very specific looking teeth. You can see it's quite a large tooth. It's got a very flat surface on the end and doesn't have the classical root system like in the diagram that we saw. Now, mammoths have only one of these teeth in their mouth. They've got one on each side at the bottom and one on each side at the top. But they get 6 sets of these teeth, which means that as they grow, there's another tooth growing in the back. And as these mammoths grow to be adults, the next set will push this tooth out and replace it. And that happens 6 times throughout the mammoth's life. And this is actually very important to help scientists understand how old that individual is, because we've got a very specific pattern and size for each of the 6 maleiforms or molars that we find in mammoths. And so to be able to distinguish what the pattern when the size of that maleiform is can tell us if it was the first one, which would mean that was a very young or baby mammoth, or if it's the 6th one, which would mean that it was a very old adult individual, because it would be the last one of the teeth to come out. But something that's interesting about mammoths as well is the surface of their teeth. So this might look like the bottom of a pair of sneakers. And what happens here is these grooves are actually helped to break down and grind grasses, because mammoths are what we call grazers. They would eat the grass and then they would have to break down that grass so that they can swallow it. And what happens over time is that that tooth pattern wears down, similar to if you get a new pair of sneakers. If you run around a lot with it, after a while, what's going to happen is that pattern on your sneakers is going to wear down. You're going to have a very smooth surface. And this is what happens as well with animals and teeth, especially like I said here with the mammoth, is that the grinding of that food material breaks down and wears down the pattern on the teeth. And so when it's a very smooth tooth, we can also see that it's an older individual because it's chewed a lot over its life. And then we have the mastodon as well. And you'll see this tooth is quite different from the mammoth, even though it is also proboscidean. It's one of the elephants. You can see it's got the roots, and then it's got all these very spiky, pointy cusps. And that is because mastodons are grazers, which means grasses, which means that they would take leaves and twigs from trees, and they would have to chew them and break them down before they can swallow them. And because that's a bit more woodier and tougher than grasses, they need these pointy bits to help break that down further. And why do herbivores or plant-eating animals wear down their teeth so quickly? The reason for that is because meat is a very calorie-dense meal for carnivores, but plants are not as calorie-dense as meat. So what has to happen is herbivores tend to eat a lot of plants, and they eat a lot and chew constantly throughout the day. So the wear and tear on their teeth is a lot more rapid. And some herbivores have solved that problem by creating very high crown teeth that we call hypsodont teeth. So here we have a hypsodont tooth. And what you can see is over here is where the teeth would be under the gum line. So those would be the roots. And everything at the top is the high crown that we would see. And what that high crown allows for herbivores is it gives them more time to wear down that tooth, the same as the sole of your sneakers, because of their diet, which is, again, plants that requires them to eat all the time. And here we have an older individual. And if we compare it to that younger individual, this young adult, we can see it's worn down quite a bit. And so by seeing the height of certain herbivores, we're also able to determine how old those individuals were from the fossils that we find here. So we can know, was it a young individual or was it an older individual? And we can see this with saber-toothed cats as well. So we have a lot of saber-toothed kittens here at the Tar Pits. And what you can see with what Connie has here is this is the canine of a saber kitten. And right here at the top is where the permanent tooth is busy erupting. So just like us, most mammals, and including saber-toothed cats, we have our baby teeth or our deciduous teeth, and then they eventually come out and are replaced by our permanent teeth. And we can see this happening with these saber-toothed cat kittens as well. Now you can see a bit more of that canine exposed. You can see it's poking it out right over there. And then we have another sequence of that growth. And here you can see that permanent canine pushing through. And what it's going to do, it's eventually going to push this baby tooth out and then replace it. And when it's completely pushed that baby tooth out and it's grown out, this is what it would look like in the end. And so scientists have done a study on the sequence of that tooth eruption, or how that baby tooth grows out. And it takes about 1.5 years to grow into an adult tooth like that. So again, by understanding how teeth grow and at what rate, that can help scientists to determine how old that individual was. And next up, we're going to be talking about another kind of tooth, which is the indeterminate tooth or the ever-growing teeth. And we find that in the tusks of mammoths and elephants, but we can also find it in rodents or rabbits like I have over here. So the indeterminate or ever-growing teeth are these incisors that we see here at the top and bottom. And if you see it, there, I hope you can see it, you can see that it has a chisel-like shape to it. You can see it comes down at an edge like that. And these are important teeth to help rodents and rabbits snip at the vegetation that they want to eat and cut it down before they push it through into the back of the mouth, where they start to chew it before it goes into the belly to digest. Now, because these are ever-growing teeth, what happens is by chewing and snipping at the things, it's almost like when we keep our nails in check so that they don't grow too long. These rodents and rabbits are able to keep the incisors sharp and prevent them from growing too long. But what has happened is humans have started to adopt certain animals as pets, rabbits in particular, and even marmots. And so it is important for us to ensure that we keep their health in check as well, because what happens is their diet changes somewhat when we keep them as pets. And so, for example, is the rabbits would get a lot more hay or straw to eat than they would eat naturally. And so the food becomes softer and more easier to chew, so they're not using those incisors as much as they would. And here we have an example of a specimen of a marmot that was someone's pet, and they didn't keep these teeth in check and take it to the vet or the dentist to see what's going on. And you can see that these teeth have grown quite wild. So you'll notice that this bottom incisor is very long. And then if we look at the top incisors, remember in the rabbit, they were just these straight ones. Look what's happened here. They've grown all over the place. And we can actually see that this one has gone through the skull. And if we look over there, you can actually see a bit of that tooth inside the skull. And so that must have been very unfortunate for this poor creature. But again, that's why it's important if you have these kinds of animals as pets that you have to take care of their teeth as well. And then we find other kinds of pathologies or strange growths in teeth as well. And here at the tar pits, we have found a lot of cavities in our short-faced bear fossils. Here's a perfect example of it. You can see that cavity right there. So just like us, these short-faced bears would get cavities in their teeth. But what this showed scientists and helped scientists understand is that we don't usually see these kinds of cavities in high carnivore diets. In the past, it was always thought that the short-faced bear here at the tar pits and at other places where we find fossils of short-faced bears, that these were highly carnivorous animals. But from seeing the cavity and having found lots of cavities in lots of our short-faced bears, scientists were able to see that actually short-faced bear was an omnivore, which means that it ate both meat and vegetables and fruits and things like that, that you can see here in the teeth left by the cavities. So these patterns and pathologies or strange things that we find on teeth can also help scientists understand the animal better. And I think that's about everything we've got to tell you about teeth today. So we look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I love seeing all in the chat, everybody saying, wow, amazing, awesome, because it really is. And everybody has teeth, so we can all relate to teeth. And there's so many that we have at the tar pits that are all sizes and shapes. So lots of questions from our students. Guadalupe is wondering if you can find out what animal it is just by its teeth. So if you both see teeth, you know what animal that is?
Yes, and sometimes the teeth are the best part of the skeleton to find to help us understand what animal we are looking at. And we're very lucky that teeth are one of the parts of the skeleton that preserves the best in the fossil record, because it's got that very tough enamel. So in many cases, teeth preserve better than the bones itself. But yes, to be able to identify an animal, we want the teeth actually, because that really helps us.
It can even get us down to species. So we have 2 species of rabbits here at the tar pits. And by looking at, I think it's the 4th premolar in the jaw, there's a different pattern for the desert cottontail versus the other type of the brush rabbit that we have. And so just by looking at that tooth, we can see actually which species of rabbit it is. And it's very hard to get down to a species usually, especially for something that's small. So that's very exciting that we can use the teeth for.
That's amazing. No, that's fantastic. So the teeth look old. We talked about them being from the Ice Age. So how do you preserve the teeth that are that old? Because they're all older than 10,000 years, yes?
So firstly, we're very lucky that the asphalt is a great preserving agent. So the tar itself helps to preserve these teeth. Then again, the biological material, like the enamel, that's part of the anatomy of the tooth, is very tough and very strong. So it helps to preserve that tooth as well. And when we are working here in the lab, sometimes we find teeth that have cracks in them. And we can stabilize that and do conservation work on those specimens so that that crack doesn't grow bigger over time. And we can ensure that we have that tooth look like that for the rest of eternity, the plan. And we use a special kind of glue in the lab. It's called Paraloid B72. And we'd apply a little bit of that over the tooth to help preserve it. And then with young baby teeth, we use that in the roots as well, because the roots are very fragile in young baby teeth versus older adult teeth.
Perfect. And thank you, Ben from Yukon, for that question. And Guy is wondering why you need to touch the fossils with the gloves.
Oh, so we don't always have to touch the fossils with the gloves, but when we're working on them, it's usually a good idea because we're using chemicals. Today we're using the gloves because it helps with the contrast when we're showing a specimen. We found that just using our regular hand, it did not show up as well. So that is the reason for the gloves today. And that is why we have the gloves today. But yes.
It's all about the visuals, right?
How to see better.
And then we have a group of second and third graders at King Junior Elementary wondering about the saber-toothed cat. So we saw the saber-toothed cat in their teeth. They're wondering how they get so sharp and how do they eat without poking themselves with those giant sabers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the carnassials, so those back molars and carnivores that we were talking about, because they sort of rub against each other as they're eating, it's almost like they're self-sharpening. So as it's almost like it helps it sharpen over time. But the saber-toothed cats in particular have these serrations on their canines, like a steak knife almost. And that also helps that tooth be very sharp.
And they don't poke themselves when they eat. No, it comes outside. Okay, great. And then Ariana's wondering, what's the oldest tooth that we have at the tar pits? Do you know?
One of the oldest teeth would, if we're talking about an age of the animal's life, would probably be Z, our Colombian mammoth. We have the sixth malleoform, or the last of the molars that came through, and it's quite worn, which is indicating to us that it was a very old mammoth. And then if we're talking about the oldest tooth in geological age, we have fossil teeth here from different species of animals that dates up to 50,000 years in age.
Wonderful. And then you showed a lot of big teeth. So we had students curious about mammoths and mastodons. We also had students curious about what is the smallest tooth you've ever found?
Oh, the smallest tooth. Oh, man. Probably microfossil teeth. So we have some very tiny mice fossils. Steph, I don't know if
and the shrews that we showed you earlier with the staining and bats, they're very, very tiny teeth as well. I don't know if Agnes can bring that back up, but you'll see it with the penny. So if you have a penny at home and you go and look at it again, and you look at the O and the N and the E in the penny, you'll be able to see how tiny those teeth actually are if you compare the size of the tooth with the O on the penny. And so that's a great way of scale to show you how tiny these teeth are. And that's why when we are looking for these teeth in the lab, we have to do it under a microscope. And our microscope makes that size 47 times bigger than it actually is. So it's then easy for us to spot those teeth through the microscope as well. With the naked eye, it would be much more difficult.
Wow, that's amazing. That's what makes our museum so amazing, right? We have them that small, the size of a penny, all the way to the mastodon teeth, which are massive. And then we have everything in between. Fantastic. We have so many questions. We don't have time to get to all of them, but I do want to wrap up with more about your career and why you want to study fossils. So what made you both like fossils, and then why did you want to get into that?
Oh, so I grew up in LA, so I've always had the tar pits in my backyard. So, I mean, it's a great place to really get into fossils. It's right here. We're finding fossils right here. So I think as a kid, I was always interested in fossils. And I may have taken a bit of a circuitous route to get to actually being in the fossil lab. But I mean, there's all sorts of different experience that people can get before they do paleontology and start working on fossils. Biology, geology, chemistry even. So
yes, and I've loved fossils my entire life. I grew up in South Africa, in Pretoria, a city not very far from a place known as the cradle of humankind, which is where we find a lot of fossils of early man in caves. And that got me fascinated in paleontology, and I actually worked in the cradle of humankind for 17 years before moving to LA to work here at the Tar Pits, because if you work anywhere in the world with fossils, everyone knows about the Brea Tar Pits because it's such a fantastic site. It's got the largest collection of Ice Age fossils anywhere in the world, and it really is a spectacular place to work. but I studied at university. But before I went to study at university, I volunteered at the museum. Connie volunteered, and a lot of our colleagues that work in this field start as volunteers working in the labs. And when you get hooked, right? And you can't escape the clutches of the fossils.
It's great. And that was the students from Rowan Elementary School. So students from Rowan Elementary, come and volunteer at the Fossil Lab once we have volunteers back again. So I am going to wrap it up. One last question, because this is our last Inside the Fossil Lab of the year. For each of you, one word answer. What's your favorite Ice Age animal? The tough one.
Hard to pick one. For me, I think it's a raccoon. You know, the animals that were still around back then and they're still around here.
And for me, it's difficult to say, but you know, it's such an iconic fossil from the top. It has to be the saber-toothed cat.
Love it. I don't think there's a wrong answer, right? All the animals are amazing. Thank you both so much for joining us today. This was amazing. I appreciate you spending your morning with us and all of the students.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having us and sharing with us.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much again. Thank you, friends and students, for joining us this morning. We learned so much about teeth, which was amazing. And if you want to see more from our fossil preparators, please give them a follow on Instagram. Their handle is @the Brea Tar Pits. We also have all the videos from these presentations on our YouTube channel for you to watch later. You can catch this recording and others at youtube.com/Brea Tar Pits. So again, thank you for joining us over the last couple of months as we took you behind the scenes at Brea Tar Pits. And we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And special big shout out to Connie and Steph for Inside the Fossil Lab, and Laura and Sean when they took us inside our excavation pits. So we hope to see you all again next year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.